Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. I'm in a great mood right now. Yesterday, not so much. We had a storm here. And then Anitra said, "Did you look out the window? One of our trees fell on our neighbor's fence." Fortunately, Steven's a really cool guy. Just moved here from Ohio, so everything's cool. Everything's amicable. But so far, today is off to a great start. My brother Norm from Denver will be here for a week. So I'm pretty psyched about that. Then one of my former students and her mom will be staying with us from New Jersey for a couple days. And then my niece and her husband, my sister's daughter, will be here at the end of the week. And then after that, California, here I come. So, a few weeks ago, a listener left a SpeakPipe message that said, "Hey, I've got a student at one of the UC, so if you're visiting there, I know they'd be happy to meet with you on your California trip." Well, closed mouths don't get fed, so I am going to make a request. My favorite thing to do on college visits is talk with students. If you have a student at the schools I'm visiting who's willing to meet with me, please reach out to me. Have them text me at 404-664-4340. I've booked 17 of my 24 nights so far, 6 days in San Diego, 1 in Newport Beach, 1 in Santa Barbara, 1 in San Luis Obispo, 5 in Santa Clara, 1 in Davis, and then 10 in Metro LA. I'm very serious. So here are the colleges I'm visiting. And if you have a student there, I would love to talk to them because that's my favorite thing to do on college visits, honestly, is talk to students. So I'm visiting San Diego State, University of California, San Diego, University of San Diego, Point Loma, Chapman, UC Irvine, Santa Clara, UC Santa Cruz, University of San Francisco, UC Berkeley, St. Mary's, UC Davis, UCLA, USC, Loyola Marymount, Occidental. Those are definites. And I'm sure I'm going to get to Caltech because I got a student that's just starting there. I'm hoping to also visit Cal Arts in Valencia, get back to Redlands, but those aren't booked yet. So students at any of those schools, I have students at all of them except Point Loma, but in some cases I just have 1 or 2 kids at some of these schools. So I like to talk to as many kids as I can. So please have them reach out to me. I would be most grateful. And remember, we have 4 receptions in California. San Diego, the 11th and the 12th. Redwood City, the 19th. Santa Monica, the 22nd. We would love to see you there. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com/events. And please sign up and please include your name. And by the way, Vincent Susan will be at the Santa Monica reception. And there's a chance someone from Colorado College admissions team will join us. They're trying to see if they can move some things around and make that happen. The NACAC conference is at the LA Coliseum for 4 days after that. Before we get into today's episode, though, I want to talk to you a little bit about Thursday's episodes. So I mentioned this on Thursday's episode, if you heard it, but a podcast listener said to me, "I really like your podcast. I just wish that you would talk about athletics more." Well, that was like a sucker punch in the gut. I'm a huge sports guy. I ran track at Michigan State. I'm a bit of a sports addict. I don't think I've ever shared this before, but I was featured in the paper when I was like, maybe 11 or 12, something like that. It might have been 13. But I had this ridiculously big sports card collection, baseball, basketball, hockey, football, and I actually paid my way through grad school by selling sports cards. So I'm kind of a sports fanatic. So I'm saying all that to say that the interview I'm doing with Andy Strickler, Director of Admissions at Connecticut College. It started out, it was going to be a 3-parter, and we just had so much more to cover. So then recorded another segment and made it a 6-parter. Now we're doing one more segment. We've never done either an 8 or 9-parter before, but there's just so much stuff to cover. And quite honestly, that parent was right. It's been a year and a half since we've come back to the topic of athletics. And it started out on athletic pre-reads, but we're expanding it to all other aspects of athletic recruiting. And I'm going to ask another favor of you. If you find our folks at Colorado College, Matt Bonser, Karen Kristoff, Hillary Dickman, that whole team, or Andy Strickler helpful, shoot them an email and let them know how much you appreciate their contributions. Andy was saying to me, hey, I'll come on here every 6 weeks if you want. And then I was talking off air with him. And he said the coolest thing happened. He said that a podcast listener, the first time I came on your podcast, who I hadn't talked to in decades. I mean, we went to college together, Kalamazoo College, reached out and made contact with me. And the point he was making is, I know you guys reach a lot of people, so count me in. And I'm just thanking that listener for reaching out because, Andy's making a real commitment to come on our podcast. And part of it was because he saw, some fruit from his labor. And that's all because a listener reached out to say hi to one of our hosts. So you'd have no idea how far it goes if you just reach out with an encouraging word to some of the guests that we have on the show, and especially repeat guests like the team at Colorado College and Andy. I guess you have to have CC in your initials to come on here. I have to work hard not to call Colorado College, Connecticut College, Colorado College. There's too many C's for my brain. Also, many of you reached out to me to say you're really enjoying Carlin Green's deep dive on external or outside scholarships. And I decided to add another segment to that. So that was originally going to be a 4-parter. And I'm very excited. One of the families I worked with, mom and daughter, they're coming on to talk about the 13 scholarships their student won and how the parent and the daughter work together as an example of how a student and a parent can work together to win these scholarships. So it's already been recorded. It's fantastic. I wasn't involved. It's just the two of them talking. And I'm very excited about this. So just want to share a little bit of my enthusiasm coming up. So if you're enjoying this deep dive on scholarships, after the whole Carlin Green segment's done, you're going to get to see a mom and a daughter in action, working together, sharing what worked, what didn't work, what they learned. I think it's going to be really helpful. All right, let's dive into today's episode. I'm going to answer a question from a listener, and then we got a brand new interview that Vince did. And I really want to thank Vince. I thought he did an absolute masterful job with his interview with Sara Lovely, who's a real pro, and they will be talking all things performing in visual arts. I mean, drama, dance, music, visual arts, film, architecture. And that's going to run over the next 5 weeks. But let's get into our QFL.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hi, Mark. I loved your talk on episode 446 about not getting all adults on the same page, especially the technical part about the CSS profile, non-custodial parent profile. I volunteer for a CBO, and I'm working with a student who doesn't have a relationship with her father and is full-time with mom. She will need financial aid, and I'm predicting that she'll be completing the CSS profile, especially if she's a QuestBridge finalist, as she hopes to be. How is this going to burn us down the road when she can't get a non-custodial parent profile done by dad? Are there any caveats if one parent truly is unavailable? Perhaps we don't even know who he is. Thanks so much for any help you can give me. I really appreciate your podcast.
I'm so glad this question came in. I'm really glad because it's a really, really important question. And if you never heard the episode she was referencing, I'm going to give you a very quick recap of what I said, because otherwise that question might not make a lot of sense. So I was talking about how important it is from a financial standpoint if you're single, separated, divorced, or never married. And if the other parent, what we call oftentimes the non-custodial parent. And technically now they're encouraging us to call it parent two in financial aid vernacular, but it's traditionally been the non-custodial parent. I guess non-custodial parent sounds pejorative, so they have to go to the more PC parent two. But anyway, if they are not going to pay, you can end up not having any options at schools that require the CSS profile, because it's very, very common for the CSS profile to require parents to submit all of their financials with the expectation that both parents have to pay. And I talked about people getting on the exact same page. It's extremely important you address this. You can go all the way through, get admitted. You need money, you don't get it. They won't even give you an offer at all. So that was what I covered in that episode. Well, that raises a really important question. Is it just black and white, or is there any gray? Well, I've worked with this situation a lot. I mean, especially when I was director of college counseling at KIPP. If you work with any under-resourced students, you're going to encounter this a lot, but you're going to encounter a lot with well-resourced, highly resourced, under-resourced, moderately resourced. You're going to encounter it with everybody, but especially there, because, there's just been a lot of intentional damage done to keep families separated over the years historically, and that leads to a lot of problems with parents being, absent. So I want to talk about both extremes, and I want to start by using an example in financial aid. So one of the things that you will hear financial aid administrators say, or admission officers say a lot, is we meet 100% of demonstrated need, or we meet 100% of calculated need. And that's good. The problem is the way that sounds oftentimes to a parent or a student is, I don't have anything to worry about money because this school's got my back. The problem is most people don't agree with that formula. So they're not saying you get to tell us how much you can pay and that's what you'll pay. They're going to say, we're going to run the numbers and see what you can come up with. And then we'll meet the difference in most cases, partly through federal direct loan, some cases work study, and then mostly through gift aid, grants, and scholarships. And you'll oftentimes hear financial aid officers say, we meet your needs, not your greeds. That's a really common thing you'll hear them say. Another thing you'll hear, and sometimes admission officers borrow this language as well when they're talking, and they'll say, the key thing is ability to pay. It's not about willingness, it's ability. Do you have the ability? We're not asking about your willingness, we're asking about ability. Well, I say all that to say that that's the exact same principle that comes into play for a parent that's not contributing, not willing to fill out financial aid forms. Willingness versus ability. If you heard Thursday's episode, I gave the admission vernacular PJ, and I told you that stands for professional judgment, and that's a financial term. Financial aid officers are empowered to be the judge and the jury and the umpire on these instances and to make the call. Now, they have to do that within the context of their school's policies, which is partly influenced by the school's resources. That's why for all students personally, I think it's important, but it's especially important for students that are high under-resourced. If you're looking for a lot of need-based aid and you're not going to qualify for a lot of merit, and a lot of schools, some of the most selective schools don't give merit, that endowment per student number tends to be very important because almost always there's a correlation between a high endowment per student and a lot of money. And the more money you have, the more you can be generous. An example I like to share with my families, and I share this a lot. When I'm trying to explain this to them, I say, you have a problem. You just found out you need a new roof. Okay? And you didn't have insurance. Okay? Or you had some crazy deductible. And the roof's going to cost you $15,000. So you say, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I'm a triplet, so I'm going to hit up, my other siblings to see if they can help. So you go to one and they're like, I love you to death, baby, but all I got is $250. Like, money's tight for me. And then you hit up the other triplet and they're like, I got your back. So both of them may love you equally, both sisters. Let's say 3 sisters in this case. Follow me on this one. But one has an ability to do something and another doesn't, just because of the depth of their resources or the lack of depth of the resources. So this is often the way it is with schools. The tighter your money is, the stricter you are when it comes to your policies. So when I look at some really highly selective schools that don't have really deep pockets, sorry, but I'm going to name names, but places like NYU, Georgetown, Northeastern, okay, I don't see the most flexibility there, but they may be like that sibling who said, I can give you $250. But then when I'm dealing with like the really, really well-resourced schools, places like Princeton, and some of the liberal arts schools too, like Williams and Amherst and Swarthmore and Grinnell, I find they really come through a lot of times because they're like that other sibling that's like, hey, sis, I got your back. So anyway, probably getting off tangent a bit. But it's the same concept. Schools have policies, professional judgment gets involved, and they're looking at ability versus willingness. So I know what some of you are saying. Stuck, can you make it more concrete? Can you make it more tangible? Absolutely. So let me tell you some cases where it's pretty easy to win this. And fortunately, in your question, you said they may not even know where the father is. That's a real tell to me that you're highly, highly likely to win, because that would fall into this category of not having the ability. You don't even know where the guy is. That's usually a clear-cut case if you can show that we have no idea where the guy is. And every time I share this, I have one of the ladies say, hey, doesn't always have to be a deadbeat dad. Could be a deadbeat mom. That's true. It's just in my experience, it's the deadbeat dads. They're the ones that I always have this with. But I know that both scenarios can happen. So sorry if I'm using gendered references here. It's just my experience has been the dad. So let's talk about some things that are crystal clear. Okay, incarceration, clear cut. That's seen as no ability to pay. Don't know where the person is, clear cut. Let me show you on the other extreme where you're going to have an incredibly hard time winning this. Okay, the person's paying child support. That's like a telltale that they are involved in your life. Or there's some type of visitation rights and you're seeing them regularly. That's going to be really, really difficult to win those. All right, so what is your advice? Let's say it's in that gray area. You're going to need to have substantiation, documentation, and the high school counselor can play a really big role here in helping you out. Now, I had a situation at Westtown once, and it was one of those gray area ones. But I wrote a letter. It happened to be one of my advisees. And I talked about how I'd never seen the dad ever, never had a conversation ever with the dad. It was 100% with mom. We went all the way back to the student's middle school, had the middle school principal write and say the same thing. But this was tricky because this was not a case where the student didn't see the parent. So it was in that murky middle. And this was pretty significant because the dad's earnings were really high, actually. And it literally would have gone from not getting any financial aid. But he really wasn't going to contribute. He hadn't contributed at our school. He hadn't contributed in middle school. It was just a fear of the mom. Like, I can't make this commitment, and he's not going to do it. He's not going to fill the forms out. So in this case, one school came through for the student. And it was good old Haverford College. Absolutely. But he got in other places like Georgetown and a bunch of others. He applied. I knew this could be a problem, so we applied widely. And I would encourage you to cast a wide net if you're in this situation. He's a very strong student. He got in a lot of places. But the Georgetowns and those other places, they said, no way. Sorry. And, truthfully, I could understand their case in this case. But the point is you have these ones in the middle that are gray. I'll tell you another situation I had about 7 years. And you can see how this professional judgment gets involved. So I was working with a student who they had been divorced for 10 years, the parents for 10 years. And the dad was out of the country, but he was still involved in the student's life. And I got involved in actually contacting schools on behalf of the student, and particularly the top school that she really wanted to go to. And I actually had a school say to me, If either one of those two things weren't true, we would not have ruled in the student's favor, meaning we would have required the NCP, the non-custodial, parent profile and the contribution from the parent. What were the two things? The length of time, the fact that it's 10 years, and the fact that he's out of the country. Because once again, it gets gray when you're involved. The parent is still involved in your life. You're seeing them sometimes. It gets tricky. So now here's some more good news and maybe bad news for you based on your question. Let me start out with the potential bad news. So you said in your question that hopefully there'll be a QuestBridge finalist. So the potential bad news, it's not easy to be a QuestBridge finalist. That's not something anybody can assume. Now, maybe this is a complete rock star, but it's hard to be a QuestBridge finalist. Okay, that program attracts over 20,000 extraordinarily talented kids. And while the finalist number has been going up in recent years, it wasn't that long. Only 1 in 7 of them make it to that finalist stage. And some years it's still around that. So you can't assume that. But here's the good news. If they do become a QuestBridge finalist, QuestBridge encounters this so often, the scenario that you asked about. Separated, divorced, never married. The others, the one parent, I'll use non-gendered language. The one parent is not contribute or won't fill out the form for whatever reason. So they use their power. QuestBridge has a lot of power with colleges, right? You go back and listen to the episode we did on QuestBridge. But they work with 50 of the most selective schools in the country, and they're the number one program that gives them gifted and talented, under-resourced students of all races. And they got together and they used their leverage and they created their own non-custodial parent profile in effect. But basically, it's a much more generous definition of what somebody would need to qualify as not needing to submit the other parent than you'll find at pretty much any school. And the colleges love QuestBridge and they went along with it. So the good news is that if you do become a QuestBridge student, you have a much better chance of winning this than if you're not, because of what they were able to negotiate with their 50 partner colleges. So what do? What's my advice? Start documenting everything. When was the last time you saw the person? Documenting the lack of financial support. Definitely get the high school counselor involved to write a letter to talk about the lack of involvement or interaction at all. If you're working with a community-based organization, a letter should come from the CBO, college counselor, or CBO, director of college counseling. Also, find out what the policies of the school are in advance by talking to financial aid. And then if you end up having a favorable ruling, Dad, here I go back to gender language, get out of the picture. I once had a situation where they ruled in our favor, and then the dad, who didn't want to be involved in paying at all, starts wanting to show up because the student was a varsity athlete at home varsity athletic events. The mom blew a gasket. Anyway, hopefully this was helpful. The good news is, based on the scenario that you described, I think you have a high chance of winning because it's the policy of willingness versus ability. And when they determine that there is no ability, they're not going to hold it against the kid. When they think the willingness is there, they can't do it, because imagine if word got out. Well, yeah, all you have to do is say, I'm not paying. I mean, everybody would be bilking colleges for a couple $100,000. That not everybody, because some people have integrity, but you get what I mean. A lot of people would say, oh, for that school, all you have to do is say that, you can't do it, and they'll come up with the cash. So that's why colleges have their policy. And I'll tell you, a lot of them are really dug in on this. And if you don't have it, there's nothing they can do. I've had some really, really, really painful conversations. Really painful. One other piece of advice: if you're struggling getting somebody to do it, fill out the form. Sometimes it's because they don't trust the ex-partner and they don't trust them. So I've also had success by having that unwilling other parent get on the phone with financial aid and have them explain the policies to them, because sometimes trust is so breached that the breakdown isn't necessarily just completely because of unwillingness, but it's because they don't believe the person who's telling them this because trust has been fractured. So there's just a few tips, some things I've learned over the last 25 years, and when I've encountered this. All right, let's transition to a brand new interview. Very excited.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, very, very excited about Vince Garcia doing his second interview, but I hope it won't be his last because he's a natural. And he interviews Sara Lovely, and she's an expert on all things admissions for performing and visual arts major. In part one, Vince gives an in-depth preview of Sara's background. Then Sara talks about her experience at Bowdoin, Brandeis, Walnut Hill, Tisch School of the Arts, and Julliard. Sara talks about applying to conservatory-style programs. And then Sara talks about the experience at Tisch School of the Arts at NYU and what was different there than at Julliard. Listen and enjoy.
This is Vince Garcia here in Southern California. And today I have an amazing guest who I did not have the pleasure of knowing their work very well until we joined this joint counselor group called Solstice. And Solstice, to get to be a member of Solstice, you have to have vast college counseling and college admissions experience. And it's great to work in that particular space because we usually share information through Slack and through email. And generally there's somebody who talks about some part of the admissions process. And Sara was one of the guests. Sara Lovely was one of the guests who came on recently. And I just felt that she did such a remarkable job describing what I would say is the hardest part of applying to college. If you have, or can be the most, maybe not the hardest, but it's one of the more challenging parts of the admissions process for those who are interested in the performing and visual arts. So today's conversation, or our conversation over many sessions, will be talking about auditioning for those students who are interested in performing arts colleges, audition-based colleges, conservatories, so music, visual arts, film, all of the arts components, dance, I would definitely include in that. And I think one of the things that struck me is that when you're looking for, I think, a college counselor, and we don't talk a lot about this on the podcast, but I think you want to work with someone who has experience in the types of offices where they're evaluating students who have a particular talent. And Sara has incredible experience in the visual and performing arts. And so she started her career after graduating from Bowdoin at Julliard, where she worked in advising, admissions, and administration. And then after working at Julliard, she then went to Tisch, which is at NYU, and worked in admissions there. She also did a really neat transition to Brandeis, and she had a more sort of comprehensive experience. And I think the standout there of her work, not only in admissions, but also she oversaw merit scholarships and led students through medical school and fellowship applications like Fulbright and Rhodes. So she has an understanding of what creates impact, not only in the performing arts, but also as a college student. And then she went to the Walnut Hill School, which is a performing arts school that really nurtures and produces some very talented students. And I think one of the things that when we were originally sort of prepping for this interview, one of the things that really stood out to me is, when you're doing, let's say, musical theater, and you have to present, you have to apply broadly, and managing that process, it's a double application. And
Absolutely.
Sara's going to talk a little bit about that. But then it was managing, was it 30, 40 students that you would manage?
At Walnut Hill?
Yeah.
It was about 50 per counselor there. Yeah. So it was a lot. Yeah. It was a lot. But I also, Vince, didn't know any different. So, when I kind of went out on my own in 2020 and started working with non-artists, my eyes were really opened to how complex it is to work with artists. So it's kind of the opposite experience that some people might have.
Yeah. I learned the opposite way. I started in a college counseling office and started to work with, those applying in the performing arts, and realized that you were sort of doubling the work. There's more essays, you're curating a portfolio. But I think the way that I want to start today is, my first question for Sara is, you went to Bowdoin. You were clearly an athlete in high school and I'm not sure in college, but how did you make that transition to Julliard, and talk about learning about performing arts admissions in the first part of your career?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and for that introduction. So I was sort of growing up interested in theater, and I performed a bit growing up, but I was also, an athlete too. I was a swimmer and I played soccer. And so when I went to college, I just thought I can kind of do all of this, right? So I did. I swam in college. I played soccer. I swam for 4 years. I played soccer for 2 years. I played water polo for 2 years. But I was also really heavily involved in the theater program at Bowdoin. So I did a lot of shows, primarily acting. And I really felt like I had a very full experience there. And so when I was looking at life after college, I really credit the career counseling folks at Bowdoin, because I met with them and I was pretty sure I wanted to move to New York. I had grown up in Maine. I needed to get out of Maine. And although now I appreciate it looking back, how wonderful it was to grow up there. And so one of the career counseling folks gave me a brochure, because at that time the internet wasn't what it is now, and she gave me this brochure about this professional intern program that they have at Julliard. And I just thought, what a great way to be able to kind of find intersection between my love of the arts and also my love of education. I mean, my mom was a teacher, my siblings teachers, and so education was always really important to me too. And of course, I had known what Julliard was, so I was very fortunate to be given the position within that professional internship program at Julliard, and I spent the year in the drama division there.
Wow!
With all the rising stars who are now everywhere, all over your television and film screens. So, and it really gave me a window into that very specific type of college experience. And at that time, I don't think I realized that there was, I realized my own experience at Bowdoin, which was very different, but then going to Tisch from there, I realized, wow, okay, so that's also a conservatory style program, but it's in a very different context, right? So it's in a university context. So students at Julliard are studying their art, 90% of the time. And students at NYU, some of them might be, but some of them might be double majoring. When I worked at NYU, I had a group of advisees, and some of them were double majoring in math, or history or something. So they were having a slightly more traditional experience, although it's NYU, so it's like not traditional at all, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of how I arrived at those two places.
Now talk a little bit about, because Julliard has a very specific admissions experience that's rarer even in among theater auditions. Talk about that process. What was the most surprising part to you, and what kind of advice would you give someone who's looking at Julliard?
So, yeah, and I can probably open it up to not just Julliard, but to conservatory style programs in general, okay. I think, because those are, when you're going into that type of program, you're really committing to studying your art really in a full-time capacity and surrounding yourself with other artists. And so I think that that's something, one of my pieces of advice to families that I work with when they're thinking about how to choose a school is not just to choose it because, oh, Julliard. Well, Julliard's Julliard. I have to go to a place like that, you know? Well, is it the right fit for you though? Right? Are you looking for that type of really intensity of arts training? And not only that, but to be surrounded in the community by artists as well. And some students are like, yes, that is absolutely what I want to do. And then for some students, it's actually not a good fit. They're really looking to be in residence halls with kids who are biomedical engineering students or, you know, business majors. So I think that was eye-opening for me. I don't know that it was shocking, because I think that I understood that Julliard is a conservatory, right? I think one of the things that I was really struck by though when working at Julliard is how down to earth and wonderful everybody was. That sounds like I thought that they were, you know, pretentious or something before I went in, but I just think that there was so much commitment to the arts at a school like that, and it was so refreshing as somebody who is such a lover of the arts to be surrounded by that all the time. It was just such an amazing experience. I went to so many shows Broadway shows when I was there, and just to be really a consumer of the arts was amazing.
That's great. Now, you said Tisch is a different program. What would a student, if they were looking at Tisch, how would it be different from Julliard?
Yeah, so I think that my students who are most successful at a school like NYU or, you know, some of these other programs that are housed within universities, you might still be studying your art about the same amount of time, but you're also expected typically to have an experience in the classroom outside of your art form. And so that was one of the things that I saw a lot at NYU. And again, this is, you know, my personal experience, but that students were also really interested in seeing themselves as artists within sort of society. One of the best examples I can think of for that, it's my own experience in my master's degree in educational theater, where I worked with a couple of other students who were in the master's and PhD program, and we developed a reentry program for men and women who had been incarcerated. And so it was really studying kind of the intersection between criminal justice and the arts, which to me, I had never considered before. I had sort of thought of the arts as being kind of highly performative, or with visual arts as being like really exhibition heavy. But it was really about taking two disciplines that were not related at all and uniting them. And so I think that there was a lot of that in my experience at NYU, where students were making connections across disciplines, and they were able to because of the structure of the curriculum at a school like that. You know, universities have a lot of resources, and if a student wants to be able to take classes and other things, typically at a university, it's a little easier than at a conservatory.
And that's because at NYU, you would have probably a third of your requirements are in general education, where you're taking history or psychology or a quantitative class, some science classes, maybe a language class. So a student might have exposure, and a student who starts in Tisch might find other interests because of that exploration, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And at the time when I was there, you know, students were in their studio class. This was for theater specifically, but students were in their studio for 3 days a week, and in the classroom within the College of Arts and Sciences for 2 days a week. So it was really, to your point, you know, a good chunk of their time spent in other pursuits.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so you went to Bowdoin, which is an amazing liberal arts college in Maine, and then you worked at Brandeis, which is a medium-sized liberal arts university. But neither one of them have conservatory, performing arts, or visual arts programs. Talk about the difference between the three. So you have Julliard, you have NYU, Tisch, very specialized, but still different from Julliard. And then going to a school where students are studying many different things, but it's not necessarily a conservatory. You're probably spending 30%, I think, in maybe your major, if that's your major, or I don't know what your major was at Bowdoin, but if you were not majoring in theater, how did you access? You said you still were in many plays, as an actor, but were you a major? So
so at the time, it's funny. At the time when I was at Bowdoin, they didn't have a theater major. So I was a minor. So I was an English major. And a funny story, I went in thinking that I was going to definitely be a doctor. And then I took my first bio class and I was like, no, never mind. And so that's a good reminder. I use that as an example all the time with my students to say, you might actually study something other than you think that you're going to study. But yeah, I think you're right. It's probably about 30% of your time it's studying, or maybe 50% of your time in a major, right? But you still have a lot of time outside of the classroom. And so, the way that I chose to spend that time outside of athletics and my own experience was at the theater. And I found actually that at Bowdoin specifically, a lot of students did that. A lot of students studied the arts. And so I think one of the things that I tell my families, my students is, really look into, if you want kind of a classic liberal arts or medium-sized research university type of feel, but you still want to be involved in the arts, there are so many schools that have robust programs in the arts. I mean, I had friends from college or even some of my students over the past many years who still have lively experiences in their art, even at a liberal arts college. So that's something that I encourage students to do. And in fact, if students are applying to BFA programs or bachelor music programs, I actually, if I could require it, I would. I strongly urge students to look at liberal arts colleges with really strong programs in the arts, because you can still have an amazingly successful career as an artist and go to, you don't have to go to Julliard, you don't have to go to NYU or Carnegie Mellon or Colburn School. There are a lot of other options for you. And I know that that's something that you all often preach on this podcast, right? Is like, it's not where you go, it's what you do with it. And that's something that I say to my students all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of the effort that you put into it and making the opportunities happen, I've worked with students at a range of different campuses who they maybe didn't go to the most famous program, but because they were always hustling, they were always looking for opportunities and creating networks, that made a big difference in their experience.
Friends, this concludes the first part of Vince's interview with Sara Lovely. We hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 5. Friends, on Thursday's episode, we'll have part 2 of what'll be an 8 or 9-parter on all things athletics recruiting, and college admissions. Julia will join me for a question from a listener. Part 3 of 4, Carlin Green's interview on how to win out external or outside scholarships. And Kevin Newton is back. And we're looking at your options if you want to go to London, England. Friends, I know a Harvard alum, we've lost touch, but for a while I was regularly in touch with them, who had some problems at some of their other jobs, didn't end very well. They were working at Barnes & Noble for almost 2 years because it's really they couldn't find a better job. Eventually they did, but it took a long time. And I've also known students that go to colleges that admit almost everyone, and they've just absolutely crushed it in their careers. And the reason for that is because it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff. Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.